one of the reasons it's very hard, by the way, to have this debate and even figure out what's going on is because one of the features of late modernity, unlike early modernity, is hyper-specialization. And we have ever narrower group of experts who are experts in their field. So the cancer specialists tell us they will cure cancer in 5 years. They've been telling us that for the last 50. And then the string theorists tell us they're the smartest people in the world. And it's very hard to evaluate these fields on their own terms, which is, it's like Adam Smith had this concept of the pin factory, where you had 100 different people working in a pin factory. And you can think of late modernity as the pin factory on steroids. We're so hyper-specialized, it's extremely hard to have a picture of the whole. And so this question of, is there really progress? Is there not? It's kind of a hard one to get at. But I think if you measure it in economic terms, there's a slowed sense. If you measure it in this sort of intuitive thing where, okay, we'll just look at a bunch of different fields like cancer, supersonic aviation, just all these different ways. You used to move faster. You moved faster every decade from, 1500 on. It was faster sailing boats, then faster railroads, faster cars, faster planes. We've stopped moving faster physically the last 50 years. So, that's one dimension. And so there's sort of a common sense way that we have stagnation. There's an economic way to measure it. And then there's probably always a political intuition I have on this too, which is that perhaps if you have ideas that are taboo, that you're not allowed to discuss, my shortcut is to suspect they're simply correct. And so the example I always give is Professor Bob Laughlin, who's a Stanford physics professor. I think around 1998, he gets a Nobel Prize in physics. And he suffers from the extreme delusion that now that he has a Nobel Prize, he finally has academic freedom and can talk about whatever he would like to talk about. And there are all sorts of areas that are very taboo in the sciences. So question Darwinism, or question stem cell research, or question, climate change. These are very dangerous areas. But he picked one of those even more dangerous than any of those three. He believed that most of the scientists, so-called scientists, were basically stealing money from the government, engaging in borderline fraudulent science, or it was incrementalist, not worth much. His area of his area of focus was high temperature superconductivity. He told me at one point there were maybe 50,000 papers written in that area, and maybe 25 out of 50,000 had actually advanced the science at all. And I don't even need to tell you how he started by, it was not just the abstract replication crisis. He started by talking about naming people, and this person has stole money, and this person is a fraud. And I don't even need to tell you how that movie ended. He promptly got defunded. His students couldn't get PhDs anymore. And then my hermeneutic of suspicion is if you have an idea like stagnation in science, which immediately gets you deplatformed, that's an idea we should take very seriously. So that's a political intuition I have on this. So I have a few of these different ideas that we've been a lot more stuck. It doesn't mean that there's been zero progress. It doesn't mean that the progress we've had has been uniformly good. It doesn't mean that people's fears about the limited progress we have are unjustified either. Maybe all these things are actually part of the explanation for why the stagnation has happened. Now there's a much harder question. And then there's sort of our cultural transformations that one can describe that at least coincided with this and were correlated. How causal they were is always hard to say. But if we sort of think of, the Apollo space program as this last great, technological, scientific project, there's some sense where July of 1969, where we landed on the moon, and Woodstock started 3 weeks later. And, with benefit of hindsight, in some sense, that's when progress, scientific, technological progress stopped, and the hippies took over the country. And you can describe it in many ways, but in some ways you can describe it as a shift from outer space, from exploring the world outside of us to inner space. And there were sort of all these different transformations. There was there was and I would describe, yoga, meditation. I would describe, psychedelic drugs. I would describe, incels playing video games in basements. There was all this incredible, maybe continued atomization, the navel gazing, of identity politics in a way. You could say that, people often they often lump Marxism and cultural Marxism together. In my telling, these are opposites, because Marxism at least was primarily concerned about the outside objective material economic realities. Mm-hmm. And then cultural Marxism was like the shift from Apollo to Woodstock, where you just went into this sort of interior world. You no longer were thinking about this outside world, and in some ways, you stopped asking these questions about economic growth and basic economic prosperity, and then that coincided with also with this lack of progress in these things. So I think there were all these kinds of cultural transformations that coincided with this shift. I think people often ask why this stagnation happened. My standard, or if you agree with this, and of course people can disagree, how much it happened, but if you agree with me that there's been, a slowing down of progress, that in some sense the singularity was maybe more in the past than in the future, and that you always have these questions: why did it happen? And my cop-out answer is always that why questions are overdetermined, and it could be sort of our society became risk-averse or too feminized, or you could say that there was too much regulation and bureaucracy, which is sort of a libertarian intuition I have. But I've come to think that one of the bigger factors that was the sense that a lot of the science and technology was quite dangerous. It had at least in a military context, had a dual use character, and there was already some relentless acceleration of this stuff in the late 18th, 19th centuries. Napoleonic Wars, Colonel Colt with the revolver, Alfred Nobel inventing dynamite. World War I, was sort of a break point where the sort of naive progressive narrative really got undercut, and then somehow you can say that the sort of Baconian science project, in some sense, ended in the Hegelian sense, is both culminated and terminated at Los Alamos with the building of nuclear weapons. And then again, it doesn't work perfectly, but my telling would be that it took maybe a quarter century for nuclear weapons to really get internalized by society. And then by the 1970s, the energy, the energy was, we don't want to be doing this outside world where we're going to build ever more thermonuclear bombs. We want to be, piecing out at Burning Man with psychedelic drugs. We want to, or you escape back to nature through environmentalism. We want to be in a world not of change, but of stasis, because a world of change has this apocalyptic dimension. Change is change for the worse. That's the sense that gets, encapsulated in the 1970s. And so there's a way that the sort of progressive version of science, we try to put the pause button on it.